Verse to a good leopard print, well placed, just as an accessory, not the whole big coat.
Not the outfit.
No, Monique, thank you for your time. And Kate Duckworth, Jeremy Elwood, thank you very much for being with us on the panel. I do appreciate it.
My pleasure.
I'm Wallace Chapman, back tomorrow, 3:45. Bye.
Whakaronga mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere nei, the bridge to nowhere. Ashburton races to find a workaround with the main route south out of action, effectively cutting the island in two. And it ain't going to be a quick fix. So what does that mean for supermarket supplies further down the food chain? The government kicks in $500,000 to help farmers keep their heads above water, with some winter feed and pasture ruined. Auckland's EDs are swamped too, but theirs is a flood of boozed patients, those struggling with drug problems and people in their 20s with signs of organ damage. Outgoing National MP Nick Smith is MIA from Parliament after apparently blowing his own cover. Don't forget, you can watch us live on Facebook.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata with you nei. Thousands of people in the South Island are waiting to find out when a critical highway bridge over the flooded Ashburton River will be reopened. The bridge on State Highway 1 was closed this morning after it slumped, and engineers have confirmed significant damage that will keep it closed for at least 3 days. A council spokesperson says they're waiting for the river to drop more so they can assess the foundations. Ashburton Council staff and contractors are also working hard to open an alternative access road to the town, which is expected to be confirmed this evening. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, flew over the Canterbury region today and has described the damage as devastating. She says the priority is to restore the transport link in the South Island. The bridge closure has caused shortages of some fresh vegetables and fruit in supermarkets in the lower South Island, and the Mayor of Ashburton has appealed to people not to panic buy. The floods have ripped up roads across the region, damaged bridges and destroyed farmland, fences and winter feed. The government has declared a medium-scale adverse event, enabling the release of $500,000 worth of support for farmers and growers. The Agriculture Minister, Damien O'Connor, says the government will assess whether further support is needed as the full extent of the flooding becomes clearer. The government has also given $100,000 towards the Mayoral Relief Fund for discretionary needs in the recovery. Money to repair roads will also be available from Waka Kotahi. The owners of a campground in flood-stricken Canterbury have been overwhelmed by the outpouring of community support. Waiuku Beach Holiday Park suffered major flooding when the Ashley River burst its banks, and half of the camp has been underwater, marooning a dozen camper vans. Co-owner Debbie Jeffcoat says the council and community have come ready to roll up their sleeves and help with the clean-up.
Very, very grateful for all the expressions of concerns and offers to help. Got a church youth group that's volunteered to come. So it's really heartwarming and gives us lots of courage and, that positive energy that you need to just keep pushing forward.
Debbie Jeffcoat says they'll wait until tomorrow for the water to recede to see the true extent of damage. District health boards have offered nurses an upfront $4,000 payment in the latest attempt to avoid strike action. The DHBs and 30,000 nurses who work for them are in a standoff over contract negotiations, with a strike planned for Wednesday next week. Nurses are now voting on a late offer that could avoid that. The Foreign Affairs Minister, Naomi Osaka, says there is nothing new in a joint statement by Australia and New Zealand which has sparked anger from the Chinese government. Prime Ministers Jacinda Ardern and Scott Morrison have expressed deep concern over the Uyghur people in Xinjiang, Hong Kong and developments in the South China Sea. A spokesman for China's Foreign Ministry, Wang Wubin, says the two countries have made groundless accusations against China and have grossly interfered in China's internal affairs. Ms Mahuta says the joint statement reiterates areas of disagreement with China.
So these joint statements are very predictable and consistent with what we've already said.
Nanaia Mahuta says China's response is also predictable. Outgoing National MP Nick Smith may not return to Parliament after the news of an employment dispute broke. Dr Smith will leave Parliament next week after 30 years, citing the loss of the Nelson seat at the election and an ongoing inquiry into a verbal altercation in his Wellington office last July. National's Deputy Leader Shane Reti says the situation is still being worked out.
All I know is that this week he won't be here, and then there'll be discussions at the weekend as to what the way forward is.
Shane Reti. Many in the National Party's caucus only learned about the employment dispute from a media release sent out yesterday afternoon. It's 4 minutes past 5. The All Blacks and Chiefs playmaker Damien McKenzie has been banned for 3 weeks after pleading guilty to a dangerous tackle charge. McKenzie was sent off midway through the Chiefs Super Rugby Trans-Tasman match against the Queensland Reds at the weekend for a high shoulder charge on Reds halfback Tate McDermott. It means McKenzie will now miss the remainder of the competition, including games against the Waratahs and Rebels, and also the final, although the Chiefs are unlikely to reach the final, having lost to the Reds. Meanwhile, the Chiefs match against the Melbourne Rebels, which is due to be played in Hamilton on Sunday, will be moved to Sydney if the Rebels are unable to get to New Zealand because of the Victoria travel pause. Serena Williams has offered her support to Naomi Osaka after the Japanese player's decision to withdraw from the French Tennis Open. Osaka is boycotting media conferences and she doesn't want her stance to become a distraction. She says she has been dealing with mental health issues since 2018. 39-year-old Williams was asked for her reaction to Osaka's decision following her first round win at Roland Garros.
I feel for Naomi. I wish I could give her a hug because I know what it's like. Like I said, I've been in those positions. Everyone is different and everyone handles things differently. So, you just have to let her handle it the way she wants to.
Serena Williams' win came in the first ever night session at the Grand Slam. That's the news.
A race against time.
The stock bank burst right outside our house. Run, get the animals out, kids out. It was very scary.
Surveying the damage.
These floodwaters are receding and just revealing the true magnitude of this devastation.
While tennis star Naomi Osaka quits rather than facing the media.
It is a requirement of her job that has made her the richest female athlete in the world for the last 2 years.
Fronting up. Morning reports, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Metsuba to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, mainly fine tonight. Cloudy periods and a few showers tomorrow. Waikato to Manawatu, including central high country, mostly fine tonight. Some cloudy areas south of Taupo. Partly cloudy tomorrow with the odd morning shower. Bay of Plenty, fine weather. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Horowhenua to Wellington. Isolated showers clearing from Horowhenua to Wellington this evening. Fine tomorrow, apart from some cloudy periods from Horowhenua to Wellington. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury, also north and central Otago, generally fine. Cloud and remaining showers about the Kaikoura coast and Canterbury clearing today. Dunedin, Clutha and Southland, fine. Cloudy periods and a few showers tomorrow. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, mainly fine tonight. Occasional rain in Fiordland tomorrow. Isolated showers elsewhere. And Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with showers. RNZ National at 7 minutes past 5.
Kia ora rā, Susanna. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint e tēnei rā. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The South Island is effectively split in two tonight, with a key link in State Highway 1 closed. Ashburton Bridge is out of action, with the floodwaters of recent days affecting its structural integrity. Testing is underway to determine whether it can reopen to light traffic tonight. But until then, the only way is the long way. But some key surrounding roads are still inundated with water. Our reporter Louise Tanuth and cameraman Nathan McKinnon report from Ashburton.
The main road in and out of Ashburton, State Highway 1, Ashburton Bridge, is off limits. That's also the main road through the South Island. With all roads cut off, some in Ashburton are taking risks.
He's got family over there.
So he's what, going to go under the bridge?
Yeah, he's going to go under the bridge and that. He's taking a risk. Right now, this is what people are doing.
A man wearing jeans, a fleece and a backpack attempts to walk under the closed bridge before security chase him down.
Right under there.
2 Dunedin students stuck in the town say people are putting themselves in danger.
We've actually seen people kind of like take risks that maybe they shouldn't have, because I feel like there's a little bit of a lack of communication for what is available to us. So people are just taking last resorts and spending their money and driving around and around and around, and we put ourselves in some dangerous positions just to try to get home.
Others are concerned for those isolated in nearby Tynwald, just 2 kilometres on the other side of the bridge.
I feel sorry for people over there that can't get supplies of food and other supplies they need, medication.
Ashburton Mayor Neil Brown says they're well and truly cut off.
We've divided the town between one side and the other, because it's the only urban bridge we've got in Ashburton, but we've also at the moment divided the South Island because it's the access south. At the moment, because our other access roads, because of the rain event, are shut at the moment as well. So we're working hard on opening those routes, and we hope to have them open by tonight. One route open by tonight is the goal.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says it's crucial to get this very vital link back in operation.
The number one priority at the moment is reinstating those transport links with the bridge just south of Ashburton out of action. Work is underway as we speak to try and reinstate some of those alternative routes.
It's clear the Ashburton Bridge is in bad shape. Big cracks can be seen on the road where it's sunken down. That fix-it job won't be a quick one.
But as you can imagine, with the flood levels where they have been, the fact that we have piles that are affected, it is probably going to take a bit of time even to make that assessment.
In the meantime, diggers are patching up giant splits in other roads. The government's declared an adverse event, freeing up $500,000 for farmers affected by the flooding.
For some, it'll be that they've lost some of their winter feed. For others, it'll be considerable remedial damage. We could see just from the air, a lot of broken trees, shingle all through properties that will need to be cleared alongside fencing damage and the like.
Fonterra asked just under 100 farms to dispose of milk because the flooding prevented tanker access. But today, the weather and road conditions have improved. The company says it's confident affected farmers have been able to dispose of milk in a safe and contained way. For anyone needing to travel up and down the South Island, they'll now have to wait for this crucial piece of infrastructure to be back in place and face lengthy detours in the meantime.
Ashburton Mayor Neil Brown joins me now. So Neil, what's up with the wonky bridge? How bad is it?
We've got NZTA here now and testing the bridge to see how badly affected it is. And we've got concrete blocks here and just waiting on a crane to come in and lift them on, and that'll pressure test the bit that's sunken. And if that is successful, then it's good news, and they might be able to get light vehicles over it shortly. But if it is unsuccessful, it'll mean it'll be a major job to fix. So we're hoping it's going to be a successful event.
Okay, Neil, so talk me through this in a bit more detail so I know that I've got it right. You're going to basically load up the bridge with some weight, and you're using concrete blocks in order to, simulate a vehicle, is it?
Correct, that's it. We're putting 14 tonne of weight on that section, and then they measure it and see if there's any movement. If it doesn't move, that's successful, but if it does move, that means it's unsuccessful. And no movement, then they can get some vehicles across it. But
okay.
It'll be light vehicles only.
Excuse my ignorance, but 14 tonne of weight, if that's a goer then, what kind of volume of cars would you allow, and what sort of vehicles are we talking here?
I think we're just talking cars, not heavy vehicles. So I think there would be 2 lanes of light vehicles only, but not trucks.
How long do you reckon it's going to take to do this test this evening?
The blocks have turned up. We're just waiting on the crane. They've got lights they're setting up. They'll have it done probably 3 to 4 hours.
So even if you're good to go with the light vehicles, that's the best case scenario, what happens with trucks and freight and what have you?
Yeah, we're looking at the alternative route which we were working on today on our local road network. The heavy trucks will be able to go around that way.
And how much more time will that put on the clock for them?
It'll probably add half an hour to their journey.
Okay, so even if you can get light vehicles over in the meantime, there's a bigger fix that's coming, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. Yeah, there is. There'll definitely be a bigger fix coming.
And what does that look like for you guys? How long? What kind of cost? I know you're not carrying that, but still, you'll have to wait.
I think the engineers will come in and have to design something up and price it up and get the costings that way. But if we can get the cars travelling over now, would be a great result, and the heavies going around the longer way, that would be a great result as well.
So what is the soonest that you reckon people may be able to drive over that bridge?
If the test is successful by the morning, if it's successful. If it's not successful, it'll be obviously longer, but don't have a timeline on that.
So in terms of safety then, if you do get the green light for light vehicles, do you then have someone policing the volume of traffic? Do you have someone stood by the bridge to keep checking it? How does it work?
I'm not sure on that detail, but I think initially there would have to be someone monitoring it in the initial stages to see it didn't move, but I'm not sure on that detail.
I know this is your number one priority at the moment, to basically get connected back up, but what else is on your list that you need to get to?
That's the number one priority, and the farmers and their stock feeding and that sort of thing is also on our priority list as well, to keep to get them back up and running as quick as we can as well.
So when the Prime Minister turned up today, did you ask her for anything in particular?
Having her here was a great support, and she gave us great support, and she told us we'll get those bridges open no matter what. So that was really good, and it was really positive seeing her here too. I think it's lifted the people's spirits, seeing that we've got attention from the highest level.
Okay, they've kicked in $500,000. What more do you need?
Sorry, I just missed that. The crane just turned up and went past, and I missed you.
Oh, fantastic. Well, things are moving there. I said they've kicked in $500,000. How much more are you going to need from them?
$500,000 is a good start. As time goes on, we'll know what's really going to cost, but that's a great start.
Hey, Neil, you said the crane's just turned up. What's it doing? Has it rolled onto the bridge, or what's the deal?
No, it's on the back of a truck, and it's just they're due to unload it shortly. So in probably 20 minutes they'll have it there, lifting the blocks on and pressure testing it.
Okay, we might check back in with you, Neil. Best of luck. Thanks for joining us. That is Ashburton Mayor Neil Brown there. As he said, they're standing by to test the bridge with concrete blocks to see if it holds up to the weight. We'll hopefully have an update for you a bit later. Fonterra is preparing to truck supplies down the west coast from tomorrow morning to ensure southerners don't miss out on their milk. Gaps are already starting to appear in supermarket shelves after floodwater damage cut key delivery routes through Canterbury. Both Countdown and Foodstuffs supermarket chains have confirmed the road closures will impact lower South Island deliveries, and they're working to find alternative routes. But that can mean significant diversions and delays for delivery trucks. Reporter Tess Brunton has more.
Usually Fonterra would truck their milk to the lower South Island daily. They managed to get through before the floodwaters settled in on Sunday, but that was their last delivery. Fonterra's South Island Foodstuffs business manager, James Howden, says they had to come up with a plan to get their milk south.
At the moment, plan A is we're trucking via the west coast. It's a very long route down there, but it's the only route available to us at the moment. We're hopeful that the situation will improve in the next day or two, but we're just monitoring the situation. Our main priority is to get Anchor milk to our customers down south.
The two large trucks will deliver to Fonterra's southern hubs before their franchisee network shares it out to cafes, fuel stations, supermarkets and dairies. Tynwald SuperValue is only a kilometre or two from central Ashburton. But with the bridge out of action, its co-owner Gayleen Thompson is cut off from supplies from the north.
Well, we are currently the only grocery supermarket for everything between Ashburton Bridge and Hinds. So we're tight on stock. Customers are being very patient, and we thank them for that they are buying what they need. We have managed to get bread from Dunedin. That is coming in later today, we understand. We have got some milk. And then our suppliers are all in the background working out what they can get through what roads and when. So we're just hanging in there in the meantime.
Further south in Invercargill, Kate French, the co-owner of The Batch, is expecting to feel the pinch from supplies soon. Some of the cafe staples, including dairy, bread for sandwiches and coffee beans, all come through Christchurch.
We try to buy as locally as possible, but no doubt there'll be produce and things that's going to be wiped out by the floods that's not going to get harvested, and that will have a downstream effect as well. So We're starting to see it today, and I think we'll probably start seeing it for the next few days while that road's shut. But then we always see a downstream impact to damaged produce at some point, whether it's a price increase because it's wiped out a portion of the available market.
Her coffee supplier has flagged a possible freight flight from Christchurch to Dunedin to jump over the floods and road freighting from there. She says other Invercargill businesses are feeling the pressure.
I've talked to a neighbouring company today, toners for printers and things. They're all running thin and sort of rationing stocks and things like that. It's not just the food industry and produce that's been impacted. It's absolutely everyone that's relying on distribution from central warehousing. So it's going to be right across the board, and we're going to see some fairly empty shops, I think, in the next few days.
While it's not ideal heading into a long weekend with uncertain deliveries, Kate French is taking it in her stride.
It's nature, you can't do anything about it, can you? So you've just sort of got to be resourceful and problem solve and muddle on through. We've got an awesome community, so we know that everyone will be really understanding if, we're low on stock and things. We know that our customers are fairly loyal and they'll work with us through that, but just got to get a bit crafty and find some alternative solutions.
Raywood Fresh Queenstown hasn't received any new supplies, including fresh produce, groceries, fresh fish and flowers since Monday morning. Its owner-operator Nathan Imlach says they're doing well so far.
There's a few gaps in our produce department, but we've been drawing from other areas where we can, so locally and obviously in Invercargill. So we're doing the best to keep our shelves stocked, and we carry quite a lot of grocery anyway, so we've got good backup supplies there.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern surveyed the flooding damage earlier today and was asked about supply issues.
The message we've had today is that alternate route, whilst being longer, is likely to reconnect those who are currently disconnected from Ashburton. That means food will be able to be brought back through shelves restocked in that area as well.
With work underway to create the alternative access route by the end of today, businesses are hopeful they'll have a shorter, reliable supply route before the long weekend.
It is 20 minutes past 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The government's kicked in $500,000 to help farmers and growers back on their feet. Some have lost winter feed with pastures swamped in torrential rain over the past few days. Agriculture Minister Damien O'Connor says it's just put more pressure on farmers who until now had been battling a drought. Joining me now is Federated Farmers South Canterbury President Greg Anderson. Evening, Greg. Can you tell us what are some of the most pressing challenges farmers are facing now in the areas that have been hit worst?
Yeah, good evening, Lisa. Well, the biggest problem is probably access to properties, which is the immediate problem. So farmers can get into properties that are cut off and get out, get stock away, get feed in. Then probably infrastructure on the farm, whether it be fencing, culverts and tracks, which have been washed out because of the floods. And then finally, it's probably feed. People did have tight feed budgets this year, and with this compounded on top of it, it's going to be a long winter.
So are there some properties that are pretty much submerged at the moment still?
I wouldn't say submerged, but they've got surface flooding, and but the worst thing is properties that are on one exit roads, which are cut off during the bridges being blown out or culverts blown out, and that makes it difficult for those families and those farming operations.
So what do you know about stock? Because obviously some farmers were even looking for where their animals had got to. There hasn't been big stock losses, but we'd be naive to say there hasn't been any stock losses because, of course, occasionally, as hard as you try, you can't get your stock away from an event like this. So there's been some small losses, but nothing huge, but there's definitely been some stock losses, yes. So in terms of the feed, which you say, might have been a bit tight for some, can you just, talk us through what the scenario is now?
So we have a National Feed Coordination Service, which is run by Kate Wood, and so people need to get in touch with them if they see a deficit in their feed and try and secure feed, whether it be, whether it comes from commercially or through donated feed that goes to the service. People need to, act early and just see where their deficits are and try and source feed, which it'll be out there, but it's just a matter of trying to source it.
What about getting it to locations when you say you've obviously got some properties that are still cut off?
Yeah, well, that is a problem. But I think at this stage, most properties will be right for the next couple of days. When we talk about feed, we're sort of talking more, maybe in a month's time. I mean, there'll be some properties that'll trying to get stock to the feed right now, but the majority of farmers in the affected area, it'll be later on when the feed's going to be a problem because of the fact that we're just, utilisation won't be so good at the moment with this wet weather event.
Greg, can you give us a bit of an idea about how much this is going to cost farmers?
Oh, some individual farmers, it'll be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. There's no doubt about that. When you look at, I know of a farm in my area where he's lost considerable amount of fencing, tracks have been damaged, culverts and on-farm bridges. So there will be considerable cost to some farmers, yes.
And have many people had to dump milk?
Not that I'm aware of. I haven't heard of any reports of that at this stage. No.
Okay. The Prime Minister, obviously the government kicking in that money today, $500,000. It's now declared an adverse weather event. I mean, how far will that go?
First of all, I'd say any assistance is always appreciated, and farmers don't want subsidies to get out of jail. This is part of the business we're in, but we certainly want government to concentrate on getting rural roads, helping district councils and regional councils get roads open again. We need government assistance in helping district councils and regional councils get rivers back in their riverbed, and off farmers' land, and plus maybe helping clear some of that gravel and shingle which has ended up on a lot of farmers' lands.
Yeah, tell us about that, Greg.
So when these rivers break out of their riverbed, they quite often take a huge amount of shingle and gravel, and it spreads across farmers' paddocks. And it's a real, it's a huge cost and time and money to try and get that shingle back off those properties into the riverbeds where it belongs.
What are people telling you about how long it's going to take to get their properties cleaned up?
Some people, some of their infrastructure is going to take a considerable amount of time. I'm not exaggerating when I say it could be years getting back to where they were before the floods, but it's a matter of just getting the day-to-day stuff up and running as quickly as possible, and farmers will be getting on with that right now. They're not waiting for assistance; they're getting on with it. But any assistance is certainly appreciated by the government.
Yeah, and obviously mental health's been a big issue, and we hear a lot about it. How do you think people are faring, and do you have concerns about that?
Certainly. As I've been on a few conference calls today, and that mental health thing, it's really around, people say, you certainly want to get in touch with your Rural Support Trust if you've got any concerns with it, but the quickest way to help people through that mental anguish, I think, is just helping us get the infrastructure up running again so farmers can get on with doing their job and look after their livestock. Take
a bit of a load off the back.
Yep, that's definitely right, yep.
Appreciate your time this evening. That's Greg Anderson, who is the South Canterbury President of Federated Farmers. Stretched and struggling to cope, that's the alarming message in a Waitemata DHB doctor's letter to the government. It says Auckland's emergency rooms are overwhelmed by patients showing up with alcohol and drug problems. The letter to Justice Minister Chris Farfoy also warns of the number of people in their 20s and 30s who are alcohol dependent and showing signs of organ damage. And data provided to Checkpoint shows the problem is costing the taxpayer hundreds of millions of dollars. Nick Trubridge has the story.
People screaming and yelling and vomiting and urinating and being threatening makes for a really challenging workplace.
Natalie Anderson has pretty much seen it all when it comes to out-of-control, alcohol-fuelled scenes in the emergency room. These days, she's a senior lecturer at the University of Auckland, but she's held on to her other day job as a practising emergency department nurse.
I'm sometimes spending so much time with people who are vomiting and drunk and perhaps aggressive or shouty, when I know that there are other people who also really need my time and aren't getting it because I can only be in one place at a time.
Some wake up in the morning unable to fill out ACC forms. Why? Because they're so drunk they have no idea how they were injured the night before.
Our departments are absolutely at the very limits of managing the kind of complexity and acuity, how sick our people are, how complex their needs are, and that alcohol abuse is just really tipping the scales often. so that we just can't manage to cope.
Such scenes are now completely normal in Auckland's emergency departments, and at least one senior doctor has had enough. Checkpoint has obtained a letter penned by Waitemata DHB emergency medicine consultant Dr. Adrian Kerner. Dr. Kerner was unavailable for this story, but excerpts of his letter to Justice Minister Chris Farfoy bear out just how much of a strain alcohol and drug misuse is having on the health system.
The emergency departments are already overwhelmed by the volume of attending patients. Our resources are stretched, and we're struggling with the volume of patients who present with alcohol and drug problems and associated mental health and other psychosocial problems.
In his letter, Dr. Kerner backs potential changes to the Sale and Supply of Alcohol Act, such as targeting irresponsible promotions.
We're seeing many people in their 20s and 30s who are alcohol dependent with evidence of organ damage.
Health costs aside, data provided by all three Auckland DHBs under the Official Information Act shows the huge financial cost of alcohol-related harm to you and I, the taxpayer. Between the start of 2019 and late 2020, County's Manukau DHB spent more than $16.5 million treating more than 5,500 people who showed up to its emergency department with alcohol issues. Waitemata DHB spent $18.1 million treating 3,807 people over the same nearly 2-year period. But neither of those compare to Auckland District Health Board, which spent more than $37.5 million treating patients presenting with alcohol problems in 2019 alone. It doesn't yet have data for 2020. Health Coalition Aotearoa board member Dr. David Geller spent 31 years as an intensive care specialist at Middlemore Hospital, so safe to say he's seen a fair bit.
We've seen people who have been drunk and tripped and broken their necks and become quadriplegics.
That's not to mention the thousands of alcohol-fuelled falls, car crashes and brawls that have left people in Middlemore's emergency department.
That's a real problem in some areas where there's high density of liquor stores, and there certainly would be no place like South Auckland for the high density of liquor stores. There's nowhere like it in the country, I would expect.
Dr. Geller has written his own letter to the Justice Minister, pointing out New Zealand is not on track to achieve a World Health Organisation target of a more than 10% relative reduction in the harmful use of alcohol. He wants alcohol taxes increase, marketing regulated on platforms like social media, and sponsorship of public events banned altogether. In response, Justice Minister Chris Farfoy's office told Checkpoint the Ministry of Justice has been asked to assess its ability to review the Sale and Supply of Alcohol Act. It'll then be for Cabinet to decide on the scope and timing of alcohol reforms.
Homai o whakaro, do you work in an ED or have you had experience in them with intoxicated patients? We'd love to hear from you. Do text us 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz is that address. Now, a lot of you have been asking about rail, right? Because of the situation near Ashburton with the bridge and the fact that they're looking for a workaround. You're saying, why not use rail? Well, they've got problems too. This from Kiwi Rail. Kiwi Rail has carried out initial inspections of its South Island tracks affected by flooding, and there will be a delay in reopening of some lines. Following the inspections, the main North Line, which links Picton and Christchurch, has reopened. However, there have been washouts and some damage to bridges on the main South Line between Rolleston and Washdyke, just north of Timaru, and washouts on the Midland Line from Christchurch to the west coast between Rolleston and Arthur's Pass. A statement goes on to say the affected area of the main line south is expected to be closed until at least Sunday, while the affected area of the Midland line will be shut for at least 3 days. As a result, this week's Thursday and Friday Transalpine services have been cancelled. So, yep, flooding has caused problems for rail too. te iwi e haere aki nei e our checkpoint. The rising cost of water in the super city is a bitter pill to swallow for Aucklanders. The Climate Commissioner warns farmers there's no wiggle room in emissions goals, and China's one-child policy increases threefold. Homai o whakaro, we'd love to hear from you about anything you've heard on the programme this evening. Let us know your thoughts. Hey, if you're a truckie and you normally take that route around Ashburton, let us know what you're doing and what the situation is like there. We'd also like to hear from you if you work in ED and are experiencing, a huge flood of people with alcohol and drug issues. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time now for the headlines with Susanna.
A crane is standing by to drop 12 14-tonne concrete blocks on the crucial state highway bridge damaged by floods near Ashburton. The town's Mayor Neil Brown has told Checkpoint that if the Hakatere Bridge doesn't move, light vehicles may be allowed over by morning, but not trucks. The Transport Agency is using the blocks to pressure test the slumped section of the bridge. Mr Brown says they're also looking at an alternative route for heavy trucks, which would add half an hour to their journey. Nurses working for district health boards are being offered a $4,000 payment in an effort to avoid strike action. A strike is planned for Wednesday of next week as DHBs and their 30,000 nurses reach a stalemate over contract negotiations. Nurses will vote on the offer. Watercare says the decision to hike water bills for Aucklanders wasn't taken lightly. Residents face a doubling of costs in the next decade. Watercare Chief Executive John Lamont says it's due to falling revenues from COVID-19 and large infrastructure spending. Victoria's police union insists there are not enough resources to reimpose a so-called ring of steel around Melbourne. The restriction in people's movements is designed to stop the spread of COVID-19 into regional areas. There have been 3 new community cases of the virus in the Melbourne region today. Meanwhile, Sweden has become the latest European country to ease its COVID-19 restrictions, even though it continues to have one of the highest infection rates on the continent. More than 100 aerospace specialists have arrived on short-term visas to work for the satellite launch service provider Rocket Lab. Spokesperson Morgan Bailey says the essential workers usually stay for 2 weeks after completing managed isolation. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. No mai hoki mai. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. And Nona Peltier's joined me in the studio for business news. Let's start with the young people, Nona. Now, you say they're finding themselves plagued with money woes in the wake of COVID-19.
Yeah.
Why them in particular?
Well, I think it's the age-related issues. Of course, you're 37. This is the age that they went to, and they said 77% of the people who are under the age of 37 are worried about money on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. Their concern is how am I ever going to get on the property ladder? The prices of homes have escalated since COVID. And it's not just them. 55% generally feeling a little uneasy about their financial position. Only 44% of people are prepared for their retirement, for example. It's just overall, it's a very
poor. What was that number again?
44%.
Prepared for retirement.
Yeah. And overall, it's a poor report card. I mean, it seems that financial literacy is getting worse. People are just feeling really a lot of unease. The only silver lining in all of it is that job security is improved. But, when you're worried about money day and night, it's not a good thing. And so I guess the Financial Services Council is alerting people to this. They're saying that they need to really work on helping people develop some better literacy around financial matters, because the more you know, the more control you have.
Yeah. How to plan for the future, though, because that retirement figure is interesting. How to plan for the future when you're struggling in the day-to-day.
Absolutely. And, of course, for young people, they're thinking about getting married. They're thinking about having children. They're thinking about, buying a home, having the things that their parents had. And those things seem very out of beyond their reach at the moment.
Okay. Well, let's move on to the fact that we're expected to be one of the faster growing economies in the world as countries emerge from the pandemic. So what are we forecasting?
it's the OECD, and they've come out and they said that our economy is forecast to grow at 3.5% this year, which is pretty good considering we were in a recession not so very long ago, and rising to 3.8% next year. Those are pretty good numbers. Overall, internationally, they're looking at an increase of, I think, 6% for the global growth. And they're saying that our economy is doing really well, but they're worried. They've raised a flag about our vaccination program. Because unless we are, we are advanced in that way, we're not going to be able to reopen our borders to tourism and so forth, which is what the expectation is that if you vaccinate enough people that you'll be able to open your borders. That's one thing that New Zealand won't be able to do until we are vaccinated, and that program is lagging behind the rest of the world quite substantially, really.
That is interesting. And what news do you bring of the market, Nona?
Well, I just was watching the market and I was thinking, gee, it's really sluggish. And partly because the ASX was also down ahead of the Reserve Bank of Australia's statement on their official cash rate. So, and then suddenly at the end of the day, it just jumped up from really flat to up 0.5%. A second later, it was finished up 1.2%. And part of that was seeing some of the price rebounding in Synlait Milk, which is that dairy company that was a hard hit, I guess it was last week, as well as A2 Milk, which is another one that got hit. They had some quite good volume in their share prices. So that perked up the market. We finished up 142 points to 12,462. And the Reserve Bank of Australia left their official cash rate at their record low of 0.1% with no sign of them changing that policy setting. So the New Zealand dollar at 72.8 US cents. It's about where it's been for a while now. 93.9 Australian, again, very little change from yesterday, and 51.1 British pence.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier with Business News. Outgoing National MP Nick Smith appears to be giving Parliament a wide berth, and it's not clear if he'll return to serve out his notice. The MP is under investigation for a spat in his office last year. He resigned abruptly last night and will throw in the towel on a 30-year political career next week, citing the loss of the Nelson seat at the election and a parliamentary service inquiry into a verbal altercation. Now his colleagues are denying any prior knowledge of the incident. Here's our political reporter, Katie Scotcher.
National's Deputy Leader Shane Reti, blindsided by news one of his senior MPs, Nick Smith, is under investigation for a verbal altercation.
I was surprised. And then I pondered for a moment and then I got on with my work.
Dr Reti found out about the inquiry and Dr Smith's resignation with the rest of us when a media release went out last night. And it appears the rest of his caucus were caught off guard too.
I know nothing about Nick Smith's verbal altercation with the staff, and I don't know how something like that would get leaked, and anyone who did leak something like that, if in fact it has been, is a disgrace to this place and certainly let the people in this work in this building down.
No, all I've seen is what's in the media.
I have no knowledge of that. I don't know anything about it. It's an employment matter, so I don't know anything about it.
National Leader Judith Collins was away from Parliament today, so it's not clear if or what she knew. She'll be back tomorrow. The party's chief whip, Matt Ducey, was the only MP asked who was aware of the investigation, but couldn't say when he first learned of it.
But I was aware that he was going through an issue with parliamentary services, and it was up for parliamentary services to respond.
Very little detail is known about the verbal altercation, only that it happened in Dr Smith's Wellington office last July. More information was expected in a media report today, which Dr Smith preempted last night. But at this stage, that hasn't emerged. Dr Smith hasn't responded to RNZ's requests for comment, and he wasn't at Parliament today. It's not clear when or if he will return.
That's unknown to me. All I know is that this week he won't be here, and then there'll be discussions at the weekend as to what the way forward is.
Dr Reti says this incident is not evidence of a wider bullying problem within the National Party. He says the party has changed since the findings of the Debbie Francis review into bullying and harassment at Parliament were released.
I think if you look at our conduct and composure, I think you'll see that there's been changes, and we're pleased with that. We understand it's always an ongoing piece of
of work, and we'll continue to work towards being the best that we can be and having the best performance we can have.
Mr Ducey says he's not aware of any other current Parliamentary Service investigations into National MPs.
Look, I think at the end of the day, we have a very good culture in the National Party. We want to make sure that our workplace relationships are healthy, they're respectful, they're strong and they're productive.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern wouldn't say if any Labour MPs are under any kind of similar investigation.
And I'm interested in your thoughts on that one. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. So Nick Smith is MIA. Well, he's on the public payroll. Should he be? Should he serve out his time and actually do his job until he goes, or leave early and maybe give us a refund? Let us know your thoughts. And our email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Also, the suggestion that we should cap the amount of terms you can serve in Parliament. Chris Finlayson, former National MP, reckons 15 years is about the sweet spot. Interested in your thoughts on that too. A lot of you getting in touch regarding alcohol and drinking problems in New Zealand. Lucy says, I live near Auckland Hospital and next to the Domain. Over the last few months, the homeless and drinkers in the Domain have increased tenfold. Auckland has a serious problem that we as residents have no idea of how to help and are concerned. And Peter in Taupo says, booze is just way too cheap. Put a tax on alcohol to cover the costs, says Peter. Alex says, alcohol has been well known for years as the most dangerous drug for people in society, yet it's celebrated and legal, largely due to a powerful lobby. But people demonise cannabis, says Alex, and it is illegal to grow and use despite it being a lot safer drug. You don't have someone high on cannabis beating people up, says Alex. Frank says, I occasionally worked the graveyard shift at a convenience store in Courtney Place. Never again. If Wellingtonians saw what took place in their city in the early hours, they'd be gobsmacked and repulsed. Time to curtail alcohol outlets, raise prices and stop advertising. Keep your thoughts coming. Today, Tokyo and many other parts of Japan were supposed to return to some degree of normality, with states of emergency sparked by COVID outbreaks due to be lifted. Instead, residents are facing another 3 weeks of restrictions, less than 2 months out from the Olympics. The ABC's Jake Sturmer reports.
This yakitori grilled meat restaurant in Tokyo is openly defying the government's coronavirus restrictions, serving alcohol and staying open until 11 o'clock at night. When the most recent state of emergency started, it complied with requests not to serve alcohol and close at 8. But with thousands of dollars of promised compensation from the local government not coming through, it's left with no other option. This worker says she wants authorities to keep their promises. Otherwise, she has to keep the doors open, despite facing a $3,500 fine. Today, Tokyo and several other prefectures were supposed to have their states of emergency lifted. Instead, they're facing another 3 weeks of restrictions. With less than 2 months until the start of the Olympics, it's far from ideal. Professor Koji Wada from Tokyo's International University of Health and Welfare is a government advisor on the pandemic. He thinks the Olympics can be held safely to a certain extent, but that criticism about holding the event could become much stronger if the hospital system becomes strained or the infection spreads during the Games.
What we fear is it's assumed that the mutated virus found in India has already entered Japan, and as it could spread more easily than the UK variant, infection could spread again at places that have been taking infection prevention measures, and it won't be easy to stop. We imagine that could happen in July.
The IOC and organisers insist the Games can be run safely, pointing to test events that have been held without super-spreading infections and the fact that Japan's fourth wave is much lower than daily new cases in France and the US. While a growing number of medical groups want the Olympics cancelled, Japan's government says that's up to the IOC. Professor Jeffrey Kingston is a long-time Tokyo resident and director of Temple University's Asia program. He says it's a tough spot for Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga, who has to call an election this year.
Politically, Suga is in deep trouble for the poor way he has managed the COVID-19 outbreak and the vaccination campaign. So I think that if he cancels the Olympics, he would sort of lock in sort of a downside. Here's a prime minister who has accomplished nothing. If he goes ahead, and the Olympics are pulled off without a hitch, without any significant public health problem, then that might be a boost for him.
Olympic organisers are waiting until the state of emergency is lifted to decide how many, if any, local fans there'll be at the venues. They'll want as many as possible in the hope of drumming up some much-needed enthusiasm.
It is 13 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. He moriaki in our Pita Pita kōrero after the news at 6 that the tap Auckland's water is doubling in price in the next decade. The tennis world is divided over the world number 2, Naomi Osaka's decision to drop out of the French Open. The world's highest paid female athlete was threatened with more fines and expulsion from Grand Slams if she continued to boycott her contractual post-match press conferences. But the Japanese player says she feels depression and anxiety when dealing with the media, and the rules around it are outdated. The ABC's Alexia Atwood reports.
Normally, all eyes are on court at Roland Garros, but this year, it's what's happening off court that's dominating headlines. A self-proclaimed introvert, the world number 2, Naomi Osaka, has found herself where she didn't want to be, in the middle of a global media storm. The 23-year-old Japanese tennis superstar made a decision to boycott all contractual post-match press conferences at the French Open for mental health reasons. The Grand Slam presidents said that they had tried to reach out to check in on Naomi Osaka and negotiate, but she didn't respond. So, when she stuck to her word and skipped her round 1 media appearance, she was fined almost $20,000. And to many people's surprise, she was threatened with disqualification from future Grand Slams. Feeling the pressure, she dropped out of the French Open altogether. The decision surprising tennis correspondents like Eleanor Crooks from the Press Association.
In doing press conferences and making speeches on court and things like that, she was never comfortable, but it seemed, certainly to me anyway, since last year's US Open when she highlighted Black Lives Matter, she highlighted black victims of police violence through her run to the title, that she was kind of growing into that stature and was using her profile in the way that she wanted to, and she seemed a bit more at ease.
The decision has divided the tennis world, with many players arguing press conferences are just part of the job, especially for well-paid players. 23-time Grand Slam champion Serena Williams, who Naomi Osaka famously defeated at the 2018 US Open, says tough press conferences have only made her stronger. But everyone's different.
I wish I could give her a hug because I know what it's like. Like I said, I've been in those positions. We have different personalities. I'm thick, other people are thin. So everyone is different and everyone handles things differently. So, you just have to let her handle it the way she wants to in the best way that she thinks she can.
Naomi Osaka says she withdrew to stop being a distraction and tweeted this morning, "The truth is that I have been suffering long bouts of depression since the US Open in 2018, and I have had a really hard time coping with that. I'm not a natural public speaker and get huge waves of anxiety before I speak to the world's media." She went on to say she wants to work with the tour to discuss ways to make things better for players, press and fans. Here's French Tennis Federation President Gilles Moreton.
We are sorry and sad for Naomi Osaka. The outcome of Naomi withdrawing from Roland Garros is unfortunate. We wish her the best and the quickest possible recovery. And we look forward to having Naomi in our tournament next year. As all the Grand Slams, we remain very committed to all athletes' well-being.
Richard Keegan is Associate Professor in Sport and Exercise Psychology at the University of Canberra and says that response was misguided.
It's kind of a tone-deaf response to what we know is a profound issue with mental health at the moment. It's increasingly recognised, increasingly spoken about at last. And so in some ways, I would say they probably missed the mark with that response.
Naomi Osaka is also set to be the face of the upcoming Tokyo Olympics. But it's unclear what impact this experience will have on that role.
The Australian government is facing fresh criticism over its handling of the COVID-19 vaccine rollout in aged care. As it scrambles to get aged care residents vaccinated, it's been revealed there are no centralised records to figure out how many workers have had their COVID shot. 2 aged care staff and a resident have tested positive in Melbourne. The ABC's Annie Guest reports.
Given that 2/3 of Australia's COVID-19 victims caught the disease in nursing homes, Gerard Hayes expected the vaccination of aged care workers would be carefully managed. Instead, the Secretary of the Health Services Union says the government wants workers and providers to tell it about the rollout.
It is about surveying workers in relation to have they had the vaccine, have they not had the vaccine, or if they intend to have the vaccine or not.
So does this tell you that the federal government doesn't know which workers in aged care have been vaccinated?
Absolutely, it tells me that.
The Department of Health has put the details in a draft fact sheet, which is dated last Wednesday, shortly after the latest outbreak began in Victoria.
What we can see is this is all about sort of being reactionary as opposed to being proactive.
The fact sheet says if a nursing home does have a COVID-19 outbreak, the government wants to know how many workers there have been vaccinated. Providers are asked to report online through My Aged Care.
I think this is the federal government playing catch-up. We've seen it consistently now since March of last year that aged care has not been dealt with well in relation to COVID. We've seen just dramatic examples of what goes wrong in aged care.
And Gerard Hayes doesn't know why staff weren't offered vaccinations at the same time as residents.
Our members just can't understand that they're turning up every day, they've been through the battle, and now they may get it through the workplace, or they may not, and they have to find another way to get it themselves.
In a statement to AM, a spokesperson for the Health Minister, Greg Hunt, says the department's fact sheet simply confirms that aged care facilities provide data about worker vaccinations received through GPs, state and Commonwealth clinics, and dedicated aged care worker clinics. The statement also reiterates there are programs on site at aged care facilities which have vaccinated 70,000 workers so far. But Linda Saltarelli from the advocacy group Aged Care Crisis isn't reassured.
Clearly, it's a government that is absolutely abrogating its responsibility to aged care residents, their family members and to staff working in them. Shouldn't the government be collecting this information? Shouldn't they have their finger on the pulse?
Linda Saltarelli says the government has also been lax about staff working across multiple private nursing homes, only reimposing a ban late last week.
It's unclear about why workers are still working on multiple sites. You know, we kind of know why. I mean, the overt casualisation of the workforce hasn't helped.
A workforce, she says, that should face mandatory COVID vaccinations, something the government has asked health advisors to reconsider.
Imagine watching 16 years of hard work wash away in a few short but hellishly stormy hours. That's what happened to Waiuku holiday park owners Rex and Debbie Jeffcoat. Torrential rain and water cascading over the Ashley River stockbanks inundated the campsite. But the community and strangers have rallied around the couple. Debbie, who plans to be open this weekend, describes the lay of the land.
We've got so much water around, and until that's subsided, we really don't know what the cleanup is going to be. So far, we're very, very fortunate. Only one building was flooded. Unfortunately, some of our customers' caravans were flooded. So we're kind of having to wait until the water recedes, and we'll know more as it dries out.
So you've been there, 16 years?
That's correct.
Seen anything like this before?
No. We've had some pretty incredible flooding here just from deluges and, surface water sort of thing, but nothing like this. Never had a river run through the campground before.
At its worst, how would you describe it?
Horrific. It We just didn't know when it was going to stop. The water came up so fast, and the current was very fast, and we just had to retreat to higher ground, and there was nothing we could do. And that feeling of helplessness and wanting to do something and not being able to do anything, that was, I think, the worst part of it. And knowing that our customers, people we care about, people that we now consider friends, that they were going to suffer loss, not just us.
So have you had a few visitors today, a few hugs?
Yes, we have, and it's been marvelous. The support from the community has been awesome. The mayor and council staff have been out and offered their support. We've had offers of help and support from our bank, from church youth groups. We've had offers of support from complete strangers as far away as Rotorua. So it's just been awesome.
What do you make of that? People you don't know, people from miles away, seeing your situation and making contact?
What it tells me is that basically we have very good-hearted people in New Zealand, and Kiwis are can-do people. I've lived here for 16 and a half years. My husband's a Kiwi, born and raised in Dunedin. But, Kiwis are roll up your sleeves, get it done people. And when the chips are down, we pull together. We help each other. And everybody wants to see everyone else succeed. We've had our competitors here offering their help and support. We've had just such an outpouring, and it just goes to the goodness of the New Zealand people.
And that was Holiday Park owner Debbie Jeffcoat. A lot of you getting in touch about drinking and problems at our emergency departments. Steve says, I have been in ED frequently with ill health. 2 months ago, I witnessed 2 episodes in one night at different times where drunken methamphetamine drugged patients required 6 security guards to hold each person down, 3 nurses to treat. It was quite noisy and distressing to the other extremely ill and injured patients, and the nurses were very stressed. I felt for them deeply. Raise nurses' pay and tax alcohol heavily, as happens in Iceland, for example. Steve says currently the profit from alcohol is privatised, but we all wear the costs, drinkers or not. James in Dunedin says, for a start, let's ban all alcohol advertising and triple the tax. Simple steps and a good start. Martina says, in response to alcohol and drug affected people showing up at a hospital, why on earth are such patients not charged for their treatment? This has been common practice in Europe for many years and would bring the numbers down immediately. On the cost of water in Auckland, well, we'll get to that one later.
RNZ News at 6. Talofa lava ko Susana Leata tēnei. The crucial State Highway 1 route in the South Island, cut by a flood-damaged bridge, may reopen sooner than expected. A crane is about to drop a dozen 14-tonne concrete blocks on the bridge over the Ashburton River to test it. The bridge was closed this morning, leaving thousands of people stranded. The Ashburton Mayor Neil Brown told Checkpoint light vehicles should be able or be allowed through if there's no movement on the sunken part of the bridge. But if it moves, it could mean a major fix job.
We're putting 14 tonne of weight on that section, and then they measure it and see if there's any movement. If it doesn't move, that's successful, but if it does move, that means it's unsuccessful. And no movement, then they can get some vehicles across it.
Neil Brown says the pressure testing by the Transport Agency will take several hours. He also says an alternative route is being looked at for heavy vehicles that would add half an hour to their journey. Some lower South Island businesses are beginning to feel the pinch from closed supply routes through Canterbury. Invercargill Cafe The Batch got some of its staples from Christchurch, or gets some of its staples from Christchurch. Its co-owner, Kate French, says that she is expecting shortages in the coming days.
It's just about to start hitting, I think. Obviously, most suppliers have sort of got a few days' worth of stock, so we've sort of had warning today that the milk is going to potentially become an issue in the next 48 hours, and dairy.
Kate French says her coffee supplier may use a freight flight from Christchurch to Dunedin before road freighting to Invercargill. Washouts and flood damage to bridges have closed the main south rail line between Rolleston and Washdyke and the Midland line from Christchurch to the west coast. The Thursday and Friday Transalpine services have been cancelled. District health boards have offered nurses an upfront $4,000 payment in the latest attempt to avoid strike action. The DHBs and 30,000 nurses who work for them are in a standoff over contract negotiations, with a strike planned for Wednesday next week. Nurses are now voting on a late offer that could avoid that. The DHBs say that includes a $4,000 lump sum early settlement for a pay equity claim over the undervaluation of the mainly female workforce. They say they've also increased the pay rates offered, with lower paid staff standing to gain more. Nurses have until Monday to vote on whether to accept the offer. Average property values for housing in the Wellington region have ticked over the $1 million mark, but the latest CoreLogic House Price Index shows some slowdown in the growth of those values. Sarah Robson reports.
Values increased by 2.2% in May, a slight reduction on April's 3.1% growth rate. CoreLogic says this reflects the impact of the Reserve Bank's tightening of loan-to-value ratios and the government's changes to the interest deductibility rules for residential investment properties. It says while some investors may be taking stock, the pullback in demand appears to be made up for by other investors with less debt and owner-occupiers. Growth in values in Auckland is slowing at 1.4% for May, but Wellington is up 3.1% and Tauranga is up 5.1%.
An Auckland councillor says struggling Aucklanders should not have to fork out more for water, which is set to double in the next 10 years. Auckland's water agency Watercare has confirmed water rates will rise by about $80 per household each year for nearly a decade. An Albany ward councillor, John Watson, says it is on top of the council approving separate rate hikes, which he voted against.
It's actually more than a double whammy. It's a triple whammy. You've got the 5% rate increase, the very significant water care charges, and you've still got the regional fuel tax. Aucklanders are getting hit on three fronts, and all those fronts are going up.
Watercare's Chief Executive John Lamont says unfortunately the price increase is necessary for critical water infrastructure. People are being urged to avoid avalanche terrain and the backcountry across the Southern Alps until recent fresh snow has settled. An avalanche large enough to kill or injure a person was seen down to 1,000 metres at Aoraki. Up to 2 metres of new snow is estimated to have fallen about 1,800 metres in the region. The avalanche advisory has warned of very dangerous conditions at Mount Hutt and dangerous conditions in alpine terrain at Aoraki, Arthur's Pass, Craigieburn and the Two Thumbs Range. It says people should wait for the snowpack to settle and for more information to be available before heading to the mountains. Wellington public transport operator Metlink says driver shortages are behind a higher than usual number of buses being cancelled. Last month, about 3,500 bus trips were cancelled out of 94,000 journeys. Metlink says it accounts for nearly 4% of bus trips. The company is short of at least 50 drivers, which it says has had a greater impact than expected. It's coming up to 5.5 minutes past 6. The Black Caps veteran Ross Taylor is unconvinced about plans by England rookie Ollie Robinson to get the better of New Zealand captain Kane Williamson in the first cricket test at Lord's. The two teams start the first of two tests at the famous London venue tomorrow night. Robinson says he's got a plan A, B and C to get Williamson out, but Taylor thinks the uncapped England seam bowler might need a few more options.
D, E, F. There's always going to be a few plans to everybody, so some have worked and some haven't, but Kane's got a fantastic record all over the world, and he's already been on this board once.
The suspended Chiefs playmaker Damien McKenzie is heading back to New Zealand tomorrow after being banned for 3 weeks for a high tackle in the Super Rugby Trans-Tasman loss to the Queensland Reds. The rest of the Chiefs squad are staying on in Australia while they wait to find out whether their fixture against the Melbourne Rebels will be played in Hamilton or Sydney. Chiefs assistant coach David Hill says while McKenzie is still with the team, they'll dish out some punishment of their own.
We're a pretty tight group, like to give each other a little bit of stick. So he's probably going to fill water bottles and do some laundry to make it up to us until we kick him out and get rid of him.
New Zealand surfers Paige Harab and Safi Viti have progressed through to the third round at the World Surfing Games in El Salvador, the final Olympic qualifying event. The pair were in the same second round heat, with Harab winning and Viti grabbing second place on the last wave of the heat. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Tony Stamp samples the high-energy Japanese electro-pop of Chai. There's some smart talk on vaping, a safe alternative to smoking, or of just dying a little slower. Auckland University bioengineer Dr. Kelly Burrows is raising the issue at a smoke-free bar somewhere in Tamaki Makaurau. And Patrick Phelps from Minerals New Zealand speaks to me about how mining can improve biodiversity on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel mainly fine tonight. Cloudy periods and a few showers tomorrow. Waikato to Manawatu, including central high country, mostly fine tonight. Some cloudy areas south of Taupo. Partly cloudy tomorrow with the odd morning shower. Bay of Plenty fine weather. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Horowhenua to Wellington. Isolated showers clearing from Horowhenua to Wellington this evening. Elsewhere overnight. Fine tomorrow, apart from some cloudy periods from Horowhenua to Wellington. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury, also north and central Otago, generally fine. Cloud and remaining showers about the Kaikoura coast and Canterbury, clearing tonight. Dunedin, Clutha and Southland, fine tonight. Cloudy periods and a few showers tomorrow. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, mainly fine tonight. Occasional rain in Fiordland tomorrow. Isolated showers elsewhere. And Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with showers. RNZ National, it's coming up to 8.5 minutes past 6.
Kia ora rā iho. No mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Watercare says it has some sympathy for the Aucklanders whose water costs will double in the next 10 years, but says unfortunately it's a necessary pill to swallow. Aucklanders, meanwhile, think there must be other ways to pay for this without saddling those worst off and hit hard by COVID shutdowns. Jordan Bond reports.
Auckland's water agency Watercare has confirmed the cost of water will rise by at least $80 each year per household for nearly a decade. COVID-19 has hit its revenue. It can't borrow anymore, so Aucklanders are footing the bill. Household water costs go up by 7% on July the 1st, by the same amount next July, and then by 9.5% each year until 2029. The inequity of this, water costs doubling in the next 10 years, is not appealing to some in Auckland.
That's tough on people that don't have that money.
People who are struggling, to put food on the table, that's an extra burden. It's all cumulative.
Those of us or them that have more money, they should pay more than the poor have to.
We can manage, but in 10 years' time, I shudder to think what people are going to have to try and exist with.
And this Aucklander thinks at least some of the money could come from other sources.
I think that we should be looking at who we give water free to. People coming into the country and exporting our water as though it's no consequences. I think the government should be earning some money from that, and they should be contributing to this as well.
This frustration at rising local government costs is mirrored by Auckland Councillor John Watson. The council just last week approved its own rates increase, which Mr Watson voted against, separate to the water charges.
It's actually more than a double whammy. It's a triple whammy. You've got the 5% rate increase, the very significant water care charges, and you've still got the regional fuel tax. Aucklanders are getting hit on three fronts, and all those fronts are going up.
He says the average household rates and water bill will go up by around $2,300 over the next decade, from about $4,000 to $6,000.
They are really struggling. Auckland is a very expensive place to live. You have this accumulation of costs from council. You have people struggling anyway with COVID-19. There seems to be a lack of awareness of how tough it actually is out there, particularly for people on limited incomes.
Watercare's chief executive, John Lamont, says this decision wasn't made lightly, and he does feel for the ratepayers. But the reality is, he says, Auckland's drinking, storm and wastewater needs serious investment if it's to work.
I'm very conscious that these are difficult times and we take this very seriously. We wouldn't do this lightly. Unfortunately, it's a reflection of the fact that, unfortunately, we've been unable to borrow more than we can at the moment. So if we can't borrow, then the only way to provide the necessary infrastructure is to unfortunately raise prices. So I've every sympathy.
Mr Lamont says people facing genuine hardship can apply to the Watercare Charitable Trust, which provides financial support for those struggling with their bills. He says the 20-year plan for Auckland's water will be unveiled soon, where he'll outline how they'll invest on average $2.5 million a day, $18 billion over the next 20 years.
And some feedback on this issue. This listener says, how about Watercare stop hiking salaries to executives? I don't mind paying for water, but Watercare never responds to emails, cuts off water without notification, has not managed the dollars they've already received well, or run a maintenance program that's dealt to the major leaks in Auckland when there's a water shortage. That from Di. The Climate Commissioner has told farmers to clean up their climate practices or risk international punishment. Rod Carr told a climate conference that there'll be no way for the agricultural sector to wiggle out of slashing emissions. Our environment reporter Hamish Cardwell was there.
A tough message from the climate czar to farmers today. Rod Carr telling them to get on board with the huge changes needed to slash emissions or face the financial fallout. He says in the past there's been a mindset in the agricultural sector that it should get exemptions because it is such an export powerhouse. But Dr Carr says our trading partners increasingly make decisions based on the climate impact of products. He says foreign regulators will not take kindly to exporters not pulling their weight. And this, combined with changing international consumer preferences, poses a much greater threat to business than local regulations.
And the world will hold countries to account. So the challenge for New Zealand in setting our nationally determined contribution is what club do we want to be in? Because there's no doubt there will be rogue nations. But is that the company we want to keep?
Rod Carr says agriculture makes up about half of this country's emissions, and the only way to meet our climate obligations is to reduce methane. He says customers will go elsewhere if we don't, which could cost the economy billions of dollars in the years to come.
New Zealand will transfer real wealth to the other nations who have done more sooner. And in a way, that's an accountability regime. You will be transferring wealth in your lifetime for our failure to do as much as we can domestically.
But North Canterbury farmer John Sexton says the changes the Commission suggests, dropping methane by 13% by 2030, does not make financial sense for many farmers, so it will not happen.
They all talk about sustainability, but unless it's financially sustainable, it won't happen, and we won't have exports. It's as simple as that.
He thinks many farmers will be forced out of business.
It's just not worth it. It's just the days of the one-man family farm are over. It's just getting too complicated and too expensive to go through all the bureaucracy that's going with it.
Vern Brazel part-owns a 900-head dairy farm in the Waiuku. He says 5 years ago, many farmers were more sceptical about climate change issues and the changes they might need to make, but the attitude is changing. And with the Canterbury floods and droughts elsewhere, farmers need to face up to reality.
They once knew when winter, summer and spring was. They turn up at all sorts of times, but people who can adjust to the reality they're in will do better than those who just think, well, it worked in the past.
Nikki Hislop owns a sheep and beef farm in South Canterbury, just out of Timaru. She says there is still a lot of work to do to convince all farmers of the changes needed, but the younger generation will lead the way.
They'll drag some of us who are a little bit more, fearful or guarded in terms of what lies ahead. They'll drag us with them.
The final Climate Change Commission report will be released on Wednesday next week.
It is almost 16 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And an update from Kiwi Rail, very interesting too. The General Manager of South Island Operations, Mark Heisenbuttel, says as the railway line in Ashburton is closed, we're unable to get locomotives or passenger carriages to the town. However, Kiwi Rail has sent high rail vehicles, essentially trucks that can also travel on rail lines to Ashburton. And these could be used to help transport people across the the river during daylight hours. So, interesting development then, and a possible workaround for that bridge. It's considered the world's most dangerous eating disorder. Now, Kiwi researchers are developing tools to prevent diabulimia. It's when someone with type 1 diabetes restricts their insulin to lose weight. But people with the chronic condition need insulin to live, and going without can lead to blindness, amputations and death. Recent studies suggest a third of young people with type 1 diabetes in New Zealand avoid insulin in some way. But as Louise Tanuth reports, experts here are hoping to use technology and education to help. And a warning, this story may be distressing for some.
26-year-old Beth Wood was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at 8 years old. Just 2 years later, she stopped taking her insulin.
My parents decided, okay, Beth's responsible, we're going to let her take some of her own medication and have control over some of her own diabetes. I utilised that to my own benefit to try and lose weight.
At first, it was about having control over something in her life, but during her teenage years, things spiralled. At 18, it reached a critical point.
It was when I actually started making myself sick, so I started vomiting. I developed bulimia. I went months without taking any medication whatsoever, and I landed myself in hospital with ketoacidosis. My organs were shutting down once every 3 months, hands down.
She's not alone. A study led by paediatric endocrinologist Paul Hoffman in 2018 found a third of young people with type 1 diabetes are purposely not taking insulin. He explains people with the chronic illness are more susceptible to eating disorders as they need to manage food intake.
In many ways it makes a lot of sense. We give insulin, including lots and lots of instructions about food, and then we try and restrict them or regulate them. So it's not actually surprising that eating disorders or changes in eating occur.
But the side effects of not taking insulin can be fatal.
If you miss doses regularly, you'll have poorer control. Your sugars will be high. And we know that the higher your sugars, the higher the risk of long-term damage. It tends to damage small arteries, sometimes the medium-sized arteries. Small artery disease causes kidney damage, causes eye damage, causes nerve damage, so you can end up with permanently numb hands and feet, so you can damage them and not realise it and end up with really nasty injuries. You get kidney damage so that you end up on dialysis machine or die of renal failure. You go completely blind from the retinopathy that you get. Heart attacks, high blood pressure really make your life miserable.
In 2019, Beth lost a toe due to diabulimia. Her vision's affected too. She's temporarily lost sight in both her eyes at different times, and it's still not 100% today. 8 years on, she's still frustrated she never got the right help.
So I went to hospital for 4 weeks and did what everybody does, and that's you eat and you take the medication so that you can get out. And I left and didn't get the help that I needed. Sort of suffered quite badly ever since, really. Just battling, getting the right help, like who's the right person to see? Is it a psychologist? Is it a diabetes specialist? There's no one that does both.
But Auckland University psychology lecturer Anna Serlokius is working to change this. Along with students, nurses and endocrinologists at Starship Hospital, they're working on using technology to address mental health in type 1 diabetic patients.
A lot of the mental health needs for this population are not being met because there aren't enough psychologists who are always part of the diabetes team. One of my PhD students is developing a chatbot for kids with diabetes who are at risk for disordered eating. And another project we are working on is a mental health app for this population.
Their ultimate goal is to prevent diabulimia from occurring through early intervention and changing diabetes care to have a focus on mental health. That's welcomed by Dr. Roger Milovitz from the New Zealand Eating Disorders Clinic. He says the issue needs to be picked up earlier by monitoring patients more closely, and admits diabulimics have a higher risk of falling through the system's gaps.
Because if one looked at their diabetes in isolation, their presentation might not have been that much more severe than, say, another young person with a diabetes. And if one was to just look at the eating disorder side, it would often also not quite present as such a severe eating disorder. And therefore the risk was, let's say it was the GP or even a diabetes clinic, not be detected.
For Beth, her struggle with diabulimia isn't over, but things are much better. She just wishes someone had educated her on the risks of not taking her insulin earlier and wants other patients to get that information from the get-go.
The Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo is on high alert more than 1 week after a deadly volcanic eruption. Dozens of earthquakes have been reported in the Goma area over the weekend. CNN's Larry Madowo has the latest from the skies above the volcano, which overlooks the city.
Where deadly lava flowed on Mount Nyiragongo, now relatively harmless, a week after one of the world's most dangerous volcanoes erupted. CNN flew around it with scientists, including a volcanologist who has studied the mountain since 1995. They need a few more days to determine if the danger is gone.
I'm not ruling out the possibility of another eruption. I'm thinking and I'm saying that statistically, there is very few chances that this can happen.
Tedesco says the last eruption was impossible to predict. Nearby residents remain on edge.
The Congolese city of Goma is surrounded by not one, but two active volcanoes, Mount Nyiragongo and Nyamuragira. I'm in the crater of the second. Any of these could erupt at any time, bringing death and destruction in their wake.
The pain of the first eruption still burns. Immaculée Kavira returns to where her home used to be.
I don't know how I'm going to get another house. Even my entire business got burnt in the house.
She's stranded with 6 children and no income. Immaculée registers her loss with a local official, but she doesn't think she will get any help to start over. West of Goma, this choir in Sake rehearses for Sunday service as normal. But church is already full, with a congregation of internally displaced people. They are among the 400,000 that fled. Without shelter for those evacuated, they ended up wherever they were welcome, even on strangers' front porches. Agnes Milongo worries that too many people crowded in small spaces could make them sick.
We know that cholera is in this area, so it's dangerous. There are limited toilet facilities and they are not hygienic. And then we're also afraid that we might get COVID because we don't even have masks.
A day after CNN spoke to Agnes, she went back home against government advice. Not everyone has a place to return to. Many of the 900 homes that were flattened by the volcanic eruption belonged to some of this community's poorest people. This was one of them. These were their neighbors. All that's left now is a mountain of lava. Their homes were made of tin or wood, so they were particularly vulnerable. And without insurance or government support, they might never rebuild. Even with a cycle of natural disasters, disease and displacement, joy and faith are never far in the DRC.
As New South Wales deals with its worst mouse plague in decades, there are fresh concerns plans to bait the rodents could have a devastating impact for native animals. The ABC's Kath Sullivan reports.
Recently, Narromine fisherman Mick Harris has been catching more than just fish.
Well, we've seen a lot of mice either being regurgitated by fish as they're caught, as they're brought in the boat or released, so cod vomiting, regurgitating up dead mice.
He shares a photo that shows a Murray cod caught by a friend on the Macquarie River.
Without being too gory and too descriptive, basically 5 semi-digested, they look embalmed almost, mice that have been found in that stomach when the fish has been killed and gutted.
Mice are considered a typical part of a Murray cod's diet, but images like this have sparked fears about the potential impact that poisons could have on native species.
Yeah, we're extremely concerned.
Mel Gray is from the community environment group Healthy Rivers Dubbo.
Now, we've had Adam Marshall say that he's going to napalm the mice. Well, is he prepared to napalm Murray cod? Because that's what'll happen.
The New South Wales Agriculture Minister recently suggested that using a mouse poison called bromadiolone would be the equivalent of napalming mice across rural New South Wales. He's promised 10,000 litres of the bait, but it is yet to be approved by the Independent independent regulator, the Australian Pesticides and Veterinary Medicines Authority. The APVMA says it wants more information from the state government before it can issue an approval, which would be the first in Australia since 2016. Deputy Prime Minister Michael McCormack is backing the authority to make the right call.
The APVMA will make sure that any baiting, any drug, any chemical that is used is safe to do so.
Xavier Martin from New South Wales Farmers says bromadiolone is not something that his organisation has lobbied for.
Well, I'm advised there isn't any broadacre grain growing permits globally for this second generation anticoagulant bromadiolone.
But farmers are desperate for a solution.
This is going to have $1 billion plus hit on the farm gate if the government doesn't get it right.
He wants government rebates for another mouse bait already in use called zinc phosphide. BirdLife Australia says that chemical would be a better option. It's written to the APVMA saying that bromadiolone would cause significant damage to native birds, especially raptors. For fisherman Mick Harris, who's also an agronomist, managing the mouse plague is difficult.
I'm all for taking these little buggers out, but I want to make sure that we don't damage native fish and other native animals too. So
for now, Mick Harris says he and his fishing mates will stick to catching and releasing rather than eating native fish.
China is hoping to avert a demographic and economic crisis by allowing couples to have up to 3 children. It's the latest major shift in the nation's strict family planning policy. CNN's Scott McLean reports.
China is hoping that 3 is a lucky number for families in the world's most populous nation. On Monday, the government announced it will allow couples to have up to 3 children instead of the current limit of 2. The shift in policy comes after census data showed a sharp decline in births, a low of 10 million last year compared to nearly 18 million in 2016. And experts say the population in China is getting older. With a smaller number of people in the workforce, the country's economic future could be at risk. Some residents say the changes came too late for them.
I think the country should have published this policy earlier. Couples like us have missed the time that we could have another child.
Beijing's one-child policy was in place for decades to slow the growth of China's population and reduce poverty. It was enforced with heavy fines and even forced abortions. But that strict policy relaxed a little bit 5 years ago, when the government allowed married couples to have 2 children. But even that failed to boost birth rates. Many couples say it's just too expensive to raise children in cities.
If there are better conditions, then we'd have more kids. Nowadays, young people have to buy a house. This amount of pressure is already huge. And then you have to consider the cost of the child's education.
Chinese media says the policy will come with supportive measures, but few details are available for now. Experts say the extra benefits will be needed to convince people who are under increasing financial strain to make room for one more.
Unless the government introduces real incentives, I don't think that Chinese couples are going to have more kids in the coming years.
A trend that has Beijing worried and looks unlikely to change.
Before we go, some feedback on Nick Smith and retiring and whether we should have term limits for MPs. This listener says, I think having a 12-year term limit on MPs would suit National more, since the young Green MPs would then have to depart while they would still have much to contribute to our climate change transition. And just a reminder, stress testing is underway on that bridge in Ashburton. 14 tonnes of concrete blocks being loaded on there to see if the Boeing can take the strain. Fingers crossed, if it works out, light traffic may be allowed over the bridge from tomorrow morning. News team will keep you up to date with that. And don't forget, you can check out all our stories online, particularly the video ones. And hey, we'll be back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. I'm Catriona McLeod. A crane has begun dropping concrete blocks on the damaged Ashburton River Bridge to test its strength. Thousands of people can't travel after raging floodwaters hit the State Highway 1 bridge. Some Lower South Island businesses are beginning to feel the pinch from closed supply routes through Canterbury. District health boards have offered nurses an upfront $4,000 payment in the latest attempt to avoid strike action. And average property values for housing in the Wellington region have ticked over the $1 million mark. Those are the headlines. More news at 7.
The best thing about winter for me is twofold. Number one,
rugby, because that's good. The ground's soft, it's good for tackling. Number 2 is it's really acceptable just to wear tracksuit pants a lot of the places, like even the supermarket. So I'll go with those. That's the best thing about winter. Best thing about hosting first up? Well, apart from use of the company helicopter, probably my workmates.